we are going to be answering another question from the box, my favorite kind of thing to do. Although this does mean that we're running, I'm getting to the bottom of the list. Not the bottom of the list, but the bottom of the end of the list of things that have been put in there. So don't be shy. You don't have to put your name on it. The only dumb question is one that you don't put in the box. So it doesn't matter what you put in there. If it's a Bible question or sermon request, it's a good question. Here is what the question, well, I say a question. It wasn't really a question. It was a question without being a question. It said this: lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. I think it also said 1 John 2:16, which is the reference there. So more of a request than a question, but it's a good one nevertheless. What are these? We've all heard of these. Anybody that's, been to anywhere where they hear sermons for a decent amount of time in their lives is going to hear these words at some point, and probably won't take very long. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. This trio, if you will, is really, it's become known as the three avenues of temptation in some way or another, some way to refer to it. The three areas of temptation, the three kinds of temptation or types of temptation. And really what they are in extremely summarized fashion is it's three areas which the world, or really the devil, exploits or uses to make the Christian, to use the analogy we just saw in 2 Peter, to make the Christian's vomit seem appealing to him to turn back to. I say we looked at it in 2 Peter. We didn't really, because we didn't look much at verse 22. But Peter said the person who becomes a Christian and turns back is like a dog that returns to his vomit. If you have a dog, I bet you've seen it. And I bet you've done the same thing I do, and that's jump off the couch and go, "Hey, get out!" And it works usually. But it's a very vivid analogy for a Christian turning back to the world. So these three things are areas which the world uses, or the devil really uses, to make that vomit that the Christian has left behind seem so appealing as to lure him in to return to it. These three things. And again, they're very summarized, very abbreviated, a skeletal outline, if you will, and there are many temptations that would go underneath each one. But in general, very vaguely, these are the three. You can almost, if not, you could pretty much put every temptation in one of these. They'll fit in one of these categories. So what exactly are they then? What are these avenues of temptation? That's what we're going to look at for just a few minutes this morning, really just based on 1 John 2, verse 16 that Ron read just a second ago. We'll make a reference to a couple other places, but mostly it's going to come right from that verse where it's mentioned. So what is the lust of the flesh? Well, here we go. The first thing we're going to have to point out, really, is the word lust. What is that? It's an unfortunate word, to be completely honest, because the English word lust has been sadly corrupted. It doesn't mean in modern English what it is supposed to mean. The word translated lust in many of the Bible versions, it doesn't mean what we mean when we use that word. The word lust in our language, it's come to refer exclusively to sexual desire. And that's the only way it's used ever in modern English. But the word translated lust in the Bible doesn't mean that. It would include that, but that's not what it is. It really just means a desire. The Greek word means a desire for something forbidden or simply inordinate. It's an unbecoming desire. It's a bad desire of any kind. It includes that limited sense, that specific kind of desire, but it's not limited to that. It's any kind of unlawful desire, forbidden desire. And then we got to look at the word flesh, which is used in a few different ways in the scriptures. It's not, in this sense, talking necessarily about the physical body. He's not necessarily, indirectly he might be, he's not talking about anything to do with our physical body per se. Some would say, the desires of the body are not necessarily sinful, which is true. Hunger is not sinful. That's not a sinful desire. And so eating is not a sinful action. Isn't that fulfilling a fleshly desire? Well, yeah, pretty much it is, isn't it? I don't know what else you'd call it. But they would say, but gluttony, see, there's a sin. Eating's not a sin, but gluttony is a sin. But I don't think he's talking about the physical body necessarily. He seems to be talking about using the word flesh in that other sense that Paul used it in Galatians chapter 5. The works of the flesh are these. 1, 2, 3, 4. All sins, fornication. And we got covetousness and all these different kinds of things. These are the works of the flesh as opposed to works of the Spirit. John's using flesh primarily in that sense. One commentator sort of summarized it as, lust of the flesh is anything that appeals to man's fallen nature. A person is has a certain pattern of behavior in their lives. Then they become a Christian, for instance. They change. They're different. They still have that old man there. In a sense, we're supposed to put off that old man, but he's still hanging around somewhere. And there's that battle that goes on. Well, lust of the flesh is anything that appeals to that old person who I used to be before I became a Christian. So any desire that is simply to appease that side of me that I'm supposed to have killed is the lust of the flesh. Falls under that category of the lust of the flesh. Anything that appeals to man's fallen nature. Another writer said, John insists that we must not have the habit, or that we must not be it must not be the course of our lives to give ourselves, regardless of the consequences, to those desires of the flesh. That is the idea that John is talking about. People who just give themselves over to those desires. They don't think about consequences. They don't think about anything except I want that and I'm going to have that. The end. Shoot first, ask questions later. That kind of philosophy. Not a good one to have, to be honest, in daily life. You want to think about it before you do it, but that desire of the flesh can pull us in and lead us into sin. So lust of the flesh, anything that appeals to that old person that we used to be, that we're not supposed to be anymore. And if you want to see what the lust of the flesh, how they exhibit themselves, or how it exhibits itself, you turn to Galatians 5, where we just mentioned. The lust of the flesh exhibit themselves in the works of the flesh, is the point that Guy and Woods made, which is a very good point. What about lust of the eyes then? Well, if we can understand lust of the flesh, surely we can understand lust of the eyes. Well, it may not be as simple as it seems. Surely, if flesh did mean the physical body, then the eyes would just mean the physical eyes, and so it would make perfect sense. And that is true to an extent, but we have to understand what's the significance of our eyes in our human lives. Eyes are a blessing from God, don't you think? I'm pretty sure they are. One of the greatest blessings that we can have. Even those of us who don't work very well, they're still a very great blessing. But at the same time, our eyes can get us into trouble. That's what we tell the kids in Vacation Bible School, don't we? When we sing that song, you know the song I'm talking about. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. There may not be a better lesson that anybody can learn Not just children, but the eyes, they've been called the window into the soul. I think there's something to be said about that. But when we think about it in a spiritual sense, what we take into our minds through our eyes, that's how things get into our minds, isn't it? Many of them, of course, we have other senses too. We hear things and things like that. But how many things do we see? And those things enter into our minds, our souls, our hearts. But that's the way they get in there, is through our eyes. So lust of the eyes, again, desire, that's what it's talking about. Again, one writer described it as the tendency to be captivated by the outward show of things without inquiring into their real values. You see it, you're moved by it, and then you act on it, whatever it is. And it may not even be much of an action. It's just maybe a way of thinking now, or a character trait of coveting or something like that. Jesus talked about looking at a woman with lustful intent. You know how that begins? When you first see. Look at David. Bathsheba. How'd that start? Started with the eyes, technically speaking. Probably go back further than that. He didn't go to battle. That was one issue. He slept in late. That was another issue. But really, it started when he walked out there and he saw. And that's how it all began. So, we as people, just like David was, we can see things, and through that avenue of seeing, these evil desires get into our hearts. Just because we see those things. Another writer said that description there that you see on the screen cuts to the real heart of the issue, because all these temptations of the world focus on enjoyment in the present without an analysis or understanding of the ramifications of those enjoyments. That's Epicureanism. You chase that pleasure, and that's all that matters. The only thing you have to be worried about is being sad or having any kind of bad feeling. As long as you're having a good feeling, that's all that matters. You don't think about, what might this do to me? What might it do to the people around me? What kinds of consequences can it have? But you just focus on present enjoyment, and the eyes are the beginning of that many, many times in multiple instances, not just a once overall time, but at many different, separate individual instances. Lust of the eyes, letting the eyes open up and get evil desires into our spirits, our souls, our hearts. Finally, the pride of life. I prefer the old ASV. I actually didn't double check the old King James. I'm going to assume it might say pride. That's how it's usually referred to, pride of life. I like the word vainglory. It's not nearly as popular of a word, but I just like it because I think it describes what we're talking about very clearly in itself. If we know what glory is and we know what vain means, then we can kind of piece together what vainglory is. What is vainglory? Well, it's glory that's vain. So we're talking about the vainglory of life. Vanity, selfish glory. It's a kind of pride. So pride is really not a bad word to use there. Kaufman said it's the utterly selfish instinct in all human life that insists upon achieving the fulfillment of the person itself. All I care about is my own glory, my own whatever it might be. And with that comes a whole lot of additional ugly things. Bragging. I may be the only one here that despises a braggart. Bragging almost more than anything else. Somebody who's always the best or got the best or knows the best, has experienced the most, more things, I guess, than other people or whatever it may be. Or they know somebody who knows somebody who's done better than you, done something more impressive than you, or has something more impressive than you. That's part of vainglory too, isn't it? Vainglory. There's no glory in that, but they think it is. It's arrogance, empty pride and pretentiousness, trying to gain credit that doesn't belong to you, trying to outdo your neighbors. One writer said the word for pride was used to describe a braggart who was trying to impress people with his importance. People have always tried to outdo others in their spending and their getting. He said it's amazing what stupid things people will do just to make an impression. They even sacrifice honesty and integrity in return for notoriety and a feeling of importance. So maybe it's being dishonest in business or something, or maybe it's just making things up. Totally just made up. Didn't happen. It's just a fiction, something, imagination. But you're telling people, you'll never believe what I did last week, this or that, or guess who I saw at Walmart? Some celebrity, I don't know. I saw Elvis Presley at Walmart. I know it was him. He had his guitar, and you could tell. I don't care what you say. The central lust of the ego is what's in view here. My ego, vainglory. It's not a great trait to have, but we can get caught up in it. Maybe in a not quite as extreme, maybe as some instances, but in smaller ways, where our egos will lead us into making bad decisions. I'm not going to lose face. I know that I'm wrong in my heart, but I won't allow myself to be shown to be wrong openly. So I'm going to double down just because of my ego. So much wrong with that. Not the least of which is the fact that it makes people look good when they admit that they're wrong, when they give credit to somebody else. Always makes people look good when they give people credit where credit is due, instead of withholding it because they can't stand when other people get credit. Vainglory. Some people live and die by it. Just vainglory. I got to have all the glory. When we want all the glory and try to get all the glory, who's not getting it is God. So that's where the real crime is, in this vainglory. There are two biblical accounts in which we see these three avenues in action. They're usually the two that are mentioned. One of them is Jesus in the wilderness, when he was being tempted by the devil. And especially in Luke's account, in Luke chapter 4, because the order of Luke's is different than Matthew's. Matthew's has the food, the stones into bread, and then the jumping from the temple, and then looking at all the kingdoms of the world. But Luke's is the stones into bread and the kingdoms of the world, and then jumping from the pinnacle of the temple. That is the order of 1 John 2:16. If we categorize them in that way. When Jesus was hungry, after fasting 40 days, or it seems to indicate the whole 40 days at that point, he was hungry, and of course he was. So then the devil came and he said, if you're the Son of God, why don't you turn those stones into bread? Harmless. But Jesus wouldn't do it. That's been said to have been the lust of the flesh. Of course, it's in that more objective sense in terms of the physical body, but there is a point to be made there. Then he takes him and he shows him all the kingdoms of the world. He says, I'll give you all of it. That's the lust of the eyes. He saw it. All their glory, Matthew says. And then he takes him to the pinnacle of the temple, it says, and he says, why don't you just jump down? Because you know what? God has said, he ain't going to let you get hurt. He'll send his angels to save you. He's got to save you. He won't let your foot dash a stone. But you know what's not mentioned in there that's implied anytime you're in Jerusalem at the temple? All kinds of people. You're never going to go, especially in those ancient times, to Jerusalem at the temple and not be swarmed with people. So if somebody jumped off of that temple and was miraculously saved, that man's going to be famous real quick. That's the vainglory. Vainglory of life. You're telling me that those people won't believe in you if you jump down there and God saves you miraculously? They'll believe in you. They're not going to believe in you if you keep doing this mess that you're doing. Look at all the people that are walking away from you. You do that, you're good to go. And you don't even have to go to some cross. You don't even have to be killed. Vainglory, getting attention, getting all kinds of fame and popularity and flattery. Emptiness is what it really is. But it seems to me the best example is in Genesis 3, verse 6 with Eve in the garden. Here we see it played out so vividly. The serpent told her, first of all, he lied and said, you won't die if you eat that fruit. But then this is what we read. After he planted that seed, he removed the consequence. Notice, that's what he did. God said you'll die if you eat that. You won't die if you eat that. There goes the consequence. So then it says, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, there's the lust of the flesh. It's good for food. Again, in that more objective sense of the body. And that it was a delight to the eyes. It's beautiful. I'll admit that some fruit are beautiful, even if I don't want to eat them. And there's a lot of them that I don't want to eat, sadly, but some of them are a delight to the eyes. That's lust of the eyes. And that the tree was to be desired to make one wise. Oh, I'll gain wisdom. There's the vainglory of life, pride of life. Right there, perfectly played out. Here's what it looks like. You can see this temptation building up. You see it happening. Vainglory, or lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the vainglory of life. Here's what we need to take from these two instances. We need to follow Jesus' example and not Eve's example. Jesus never lost sight. He wasn't tricked by these games. The world's full of these games. Advertisements and billboards, any kind of TV advertisement or print advertisement, many of them glorify sinful behaviors. Have a good time. Win big money. Nobody will ever find out. Discreet. Pleasure. No consequences. No guilt. That's exactly what the devil did. You take away the consequence, suddenly that fruit starts to look good. We don't read anything of neither Adam nor Eve wanting that fruit until this moment when they were deceived, and now suddenly it looks good. He exploited their weakness, and he got them. He won. Domino effect. He exploited Eve's weakness, and then Eve exploited Adam's weakness without even realizing it. But Jesus, he never was fooled, and he hit the devil back every time. Here's what the Bible says. Here's what God said. Man shall not live by bread alone, by every word of God. I'm not buying it, in other words. I'm not falling for it. I don't need that. There are more important things in life than fulfilling the flesh. Then he said, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and only him shall you serve. I don't want those kingdoms. I don't want to bow down and worship you to get those kingdoms. And then he said, it is written every time. Don't test the Lord. If I did that, I'd be testing the Lord. Hey, look at this prophecy. Let's see if it's really true. Here I go, Not going to test him. Even if it would give me what you say it will. But as we saw, Peter was warning the Christians there in 2 Peter from our lesson text. The promises that the world gives are empty. They promise you all this great stuff, happiness and joy and just a carefree life. It's all lies. The only thing that it will really get you in the end is destruction. That's the consequence. It may not kill you now, but it'll kill you in the end. When it really counts. That's when it really counts. Don't fall for it. Now, we all have struggles in one or maybe all of these areas, all of us. That's why so many temptations fall into these three categories, because we all struggle with them. Now, one may be stronger in your life than another one is, and a different one may be stronger in my life, but we all have struggles with one of these. What we have to do is identify those weaknesses, and so we're prepared. We're prepared to deal with it. We're prepared not to fall for it when that moment comes. We talked about Achan Wednesday night, and last Sunday night for that matter. That's exactly what happened to him. Got pulled in. When he went to that battle, I don't doubt there was he had no intention of taking anything out of that city. I don't think he had a premeditated plan. But it says, he said himself, when I saw this stuff, I saw that cloak that was from Shinar, and I saw that gold and silver, I took it. See that? When he saw it. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. It'll get into your heart. Jesus said whatever comes out of your mouth came from your heart. But a lot of times whatever goes into your eyes will go into your heart, the other way around. Maybe it's that old man that comes back, that old person that's supposed to be dead. Maybe it's vainglory that we're seeking. We got to fight it. Be like Jesus. Or just be like Joseph and run for your life. If you can't stand up to the devil, you can always run from him, because you can't outrun him, believe it or not. He's not that fast. Because God helps you when you run from it. That's what these three things are. These are the three avenues of temptation. Any temptation that we ever face, Paul said, will never be stronger than what we can bear. So there's another deception right there, that you're too weak to face your temptations, or to not necessarily face them, meaning you should try to face them, but when you do face them, don't believe that voice in your head that says you can't handle it, you can't take it, because you can. You can. You can't handle everything in life, but any temptation, you can defeat it if you'll resist it, fight against it, or just run. God will help you escape. It is crucial. It's not worth the consequence to enjoy it for a fleeting moment of life, this vapor that we have of a life. In the end, we will be paid the wages that we have earned. Let's make sure that it's the wages of righteousness.